The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking garage as Dr. Amara Johnson walked toward her car. Her shoulders ached from 12 hours of standing in the operating room. All she wanted now was to get home, kick off her shoes, and pour a glass of wine before falling into bed. The sound of her sensible heels clicking against the concrete echoed through the nearly empty structure. It had been a good day, all things considered. The surgery on the 10-year-old with the brain tumor had gone better than expected. She allowed herself a small smile, remembering the look of relief on the parents' faces when she'd delivered the news. Moments like that made the long hours worth it. Amara fished her keys from her purse and pressed the unlock button on her key fob. The lights on her silver Lexus blinked in response. The car had been her gift to herself when she made chief of neurology last year, a reminder of how far she'd come from the small apartment above her grandparents' garage where she'd grown up. The sudden flash of blue and red lights reflecting off the concrete pillars startled her. She turned to see a police cruiser pulling up behind her car, blocking it in. Amara frowned, wondering if she'd somehow parked in a restricted area, though she'd been using this same spot for years. An officer stepped out of the cruiser, his hand resting casually on his holster. He didn't immediately approach, instead studying her with narrowed eyes. Something in his posture made Amara's stomach tighten. She'd felt this before, that particular kind of scrutiny. "Is there a problem, officer?" she called, keeping her voice friendly and light. The officer finally walked toward her, his face set in hard lines. His name badge read, Miller. He didn't return her smile. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am," he said, his tone clipped. Amara blinked in confusion but took a small step back. "I'm sorry, is something wrong?" "We've had reports of car thefts in this area," Officer Miller said, his eyes flicking from her to the Lexus. "That's a pretty nice car." The implication hung in the air between them. Amara felt heat rising to her face, but she kept her expression neutral. Years of dealing with doubtful patients and condescending colleagues had taught her the value of a calm exterior. "Yes, it is, it's mine," she said simply, holding up her keys. "I just finished my shift at the hospital. I'm heading home." Officer Miller's eyebrows rose slightly. "This is your car? You own this Lexus?" The emphasis he placed on you made her jaw clench. She took a deep breath. "Yes, officer. I've owned it for about a year now." "I'm going to need to see some ID and the vehicle registration," he said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Of course." Amara reached slowly for her purse, making sure her movements were deliberate and visible. As she did, she subtly pressed the record button on her phone, a habit she'd developed after a similar incident 3 years ago. "The registration is in the glove compartment. I'll need to get it from inside the car." "Hold on," Miller said sharply. "Don't enter the vehicle yet. Let me see your ID first." Amara pulled her wallet from her purse and handed him her driver's license. As he examined it, she also took out her hospital ID badge that hung from a lanyard. "I'm Dr. Johnson. I'm the chief of neurology at Memorial. I just finished a 12-hour shift, and I'd really like to go home now." Miller barely glanced at her hospital badge. His eyes moved from her license to her face and back again, as if trying to catch her in a lie. "This address is in Oakwood Hills," he said, naming one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. "Yes, that's where I live," Amara replied evenly. Miller handed back her license but didn't step away. "How long did you say you've had this vehicle?" "About a year." Amara felt her patience wearing thin but kept her voice level. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'm very tired. If you could please let me get my registration from the glove compartment, I can prove this is my car, and we can both go on with our evenings." "What brings you to this part of town?" Miller asked, ignoring her request. Amara gestured to the hospital looming behind them. "As I mentioned, I work here. I'm a neurosurgeon." Miller looked past her at the hospital, then back at the Lexus. "And you're saying this is your car?" It wasn't a question this time, but the disbelief was clear in his voice. Amara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, a mixture of anger, frustration, and the exhaustion that came from these constant small battles. "Yes, officer. This is my car. I bought it from Lexus of Riverside last March. The paperwork is in my glove compartment, which I'd be happy to show you if you'll allow me to open my car door." Miller seemed to consider this for a moment. "Step back from the vehicle first." Amara complied, moving several feet away from her car. Miller approached the driver's side door and peered in through the window. "There's a child's backpack in the back seat," he observed, his tone accusatory. "Yes?" Amara nodded. "My niece stayed with me last weekend. I was supposed to drop it off at my sister's, but I got called in for an emergency surgery." From the corner of her eye, Amara noticed a hospital security guard making his rounds through the parking garage. She recognized him. Thomas, who'd worked the night shift for years. He noticed the police car and slowed his pace, watching the interaction with concern. "Officer?" Amara tried again. "I understand you're investigating car thefts, but I can assure you this is my vehicle. The registration in the glove compartment will confirm that. And you expect me to just take your word for it and let you reach into that compartment?" Miller's hand shifted slightly closer to his weapon. The motion wasn't lost on Amara. Her mouth went dry, but she kept her voice steady. "Then perhaps you could retrieve it yourself? The car is unlocked." Miller studied her for another long moment, before reaching for the door handle. The car chirped as the door opened, responding to the proximity of the key fob in Amara's hand. If the officer noticed this detail, he gave no indication. He leaned into the car, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a leather folder containing the vehicle documents. As he flipped through them, Thomas, the security guard, approached, cautiously. "Everything okay, Dr. Johnson?" he called. Miller's head snapped up at the greeting. His eyes darted between Amara and the security guard. "We're fine, thank you, Thomas," Amara replied, relieved to see a familiar face. "Officer Miller is just verifying that this is my car." Thomas nodded, but didn't leave. Instead, he positioned himself a respectful distance away, his presence a quiet witness. Miller closed the document folder with more force than necessary and straightened up. "These papers say the car belongs to an A. Johnson." "That's me?" "Amara Johnson," she replied, pointing to her ID badge where her full name was clearly displayed. Miller's expression darkened. This could be anyone's badge, and these registration papers could be stolen along with the vehicle. Amara stared at him in disbelief. "Officer Miller, I've provided my driver's license with my photo ID, my professional identification from the hospital where I've worked for 8 years, and the registration for my vehicle. The key fob in my hand unlocked and started this car. What more evidence do you need that I haven't stolen my own car?" Miller's radio crackled and a dispatcher's voice came through asking for a status update. He stepped away slightly to respond, keeping his eyes on Amara. "Still investigating a possible vehicle theft at Memorial Hospital parking structure," he said into his radio. "Possible vehicle theft?" Amara repeated, her composure finally slipping. "Officer, this is ridiculous. I've provided all the necessary documentation proving this is my car." "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice and remain calm," Miller said, his hand once again moving toward his holster. 2 nurses leaving their shift walked past, slowing as they noticed the confrontation. One of them, a woman with gray-streaked hair, called out, "Dr. Johnson, is everything all right?" Miller's eyes narrowed at this second recognition. More hospital staff were exiting the building now, the shift change bringing increased foot traffic to the parking garage. Several people slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold with concerned expressions. Amara felt a mix of emotions: embarrassment at being the center of attention, relief at the presence of witnesses, and a deep simmering anger that in 2025, she still had to prove she belonged in spaces others took for granted. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Officer Miller seems to believe I've stolen my own car, despite my identification, vehicle registration, and the fact that I have the keys right here." She held up the key fob and pressed the lock button. The Lexus responded with a beep and flashing lights. Miller's jaw tightened. He looked around at the growing number of observers, many of whom were now openly recording the interaction on their phones. His radio crackled again, and this time a different voice came through, his supervisor requesting an update. Everything is under control, Miller responded tersely. Just wrapping up now. He thrust the registration documents back toward Amara without meeting her eyes. Make sure you keep these accessible when operating the vehicle, he said stiffly, as if he'd been conducting a routine traffic stop all along. Amara took the papers, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. And make sure you keep your body camera on during civilian interactions, she replied quietly, noticing for the first time that the device on his uniform wasn't showing its usual recording light. Miller's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. He turned and walked back to his cruiser without another word. As he pulled away, the small crowd of hospital staff moved closer to Amara, offering support and expressing outrage. But Amara barely heard them. She was already thinking about the recording on her phone and exactly who needed to hear it. I've written a detailed, engaging narrative of Part 1 that follows Dr. Amara Johnson's confrontation with Officer Miller. The story uses simple language while maintaining an authentic feel through natural dialogue and realistic interactions. Sensory details that put the reader in the scene. Emotional depth that shows Amara's internal experience, a gradual build of tension. As witnesses gather character-driven storytelling that avoids AI patterns, the story stays within YouTube guidelines while still addressing the serious subject matter in a thoughtful way. I've used unique character names and created a human-centric narrative that feels authentic, rather than AI-generated. Amara sat in her car for several minutes after Officer Miller drove away, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The adrenaline that had kept her composed during the confrontation was wearing off, leaving her shaky and exhausted. She closed her eyes and took several deep breaths, trying to steady herself. A gentle tap on her window startled her. It was Thomas, the security guard, his face creased with concern. Amara pressed the button to roll down her window. "Dr. Johnson, are you okay?" he asked, leaning down slightly to meet her eyes. "I'm fine, Thomas. Thank you for stopping by when you did." He shook his head, clearly troubled. "That wasn't right." "What happened?" "Not right at all." "No," Amara agreed quietly. "It wasn't. I recorded some of it," Tomas said, holding up his phone. "Not all, but from when I walked up. Hospital policy says we're supposed to document any incidents in the parking areas." Amara felt a rush of gratitude. "Could you send that to me?" "Already done," Thomas nodded. "Sent it to your work email. The garage cameras probably caught everything too. Want me to put in a request for that footage?" "Please," Amara said. "That would be really helpful." As Tomas stepped away, Amara noticed a small crowd had gathered nearby. Nurses, orderlies, and a few doctors she recognized from different departments. Dr. Patel, an older cardiologist she'd worked with on several cases, broke away from the group and approached her car. "Amara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You shouldn't let this go. What that officer did was completely unacceptable." She nodded, feeling suddenly too tired to speak. The weight of what had just happened, what had almost happened, settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. "I know," she said finally. "I won't let it go, but right now I just need to get home." Dr. Patel patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Of course. Get some rest, but if you need anything, witnesses, statements, whatever, just ask. We've got your back." The drive home was a blur. Amara moved through traffic on autopilot, her mind replaying the confrontation over and over. By the time she pulled into her driveway, night had fallen completely. The large Tudor-style house she'd worked so hard to afford was dark and empty, a reminder of how little time she actually spent there. Inside, she dropped her keys and bag on the kitchen counter and poured herself a glass of water, downing it in one long gulp. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Tomas had sent the video as promised. She opened it and watched, an odd sensation of detachment washing over her as she observed herself on the screen, standing straight-backed and dignified while Officer Miller loomed over her. What struck her most was how clearly the recording captured Miller's disbelief. His refusal to accept that the car could possibly belong to her despite all evidence to the contrary. The slight sneer when she mentioned being a neurosurgeon, the way his hand kept drifting toward his weapon. Almost without thinking, Amara opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in months: Delia Washington. They'd been roommates in college, and while their career paths had diverged, Amara to medicine, Delia to law, they'd remained close. Delia now ran her own civil rights law firm downtown. Despite the late hour, Delia answered on the second ring. "Amara? This is a surprise. Everything okay?" "Not really," Amara said, her voice finally cracking. "I had an incident with a police officer today. He accused me of stealing my own car." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then, Delia's voice sharp with anger. "Tell me everything." For the next 20 minutes, Amara recounted the confrontation in detail. Delia listened without interruption, though Amara could hear her typing notes in the background. "You said you were recording?" Delia asked when Amara finished. "Yes, on my phone. And the security guard got some of it too. Plus, there should be footage from the parking garage cameras." "Good," Delia said firmly. "We need to get all of that secured right away. The department will try to bury this if they can. First thing, tomorrow I want you to send me everything you have. Then we'll talk about next steps." "Next steps?" Amara repeated, suddenly uncertain. "Delia, I don't know if I want to make this into a big thing. I just want to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else." "Amara," Delia's voice softened slightly. "This is already a big thing. That officer put his hand on his gun while confronting an unarmed black woman who was just trying to go home after saving lives all day. Do you understand how easily that could have gone wrong?" Amara closed her eyes, feeling the truth of her friend's words settle into her bones. "Yes," she whispered. "I do. Then trust me on this. Send me the recordings, all of them. We'll take it from there." After hanging up, Amara finally allowed herself to truly feel the emotions she'd been holding at bay: the fear, the humiliation, the rage. She sat at her kitchen island and wept, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. When she finally composed herself, she went to her home office and powered up her laptop. She transferred the recording from her phone, watching it again with clear eyes. Then she opened a new document and began typing, documenting everything while it was still fresh in her memory. What Miller had said, what she had said, who had witnessed the interaction. The exact time, the exact location, every detail she could remember. As she worked, her phone buzzed with messages, colleagues from the hospital checking in on her, her sister asking why she'd missed their weekly call, and an email from Thomas with an attachment, the security footage from the parking garage cameras. Amara opened it immediately. The angle was different from her phone recording, providing a wider view of the scene. She watched as Officer Miller's cruiser entered the garage, driving past several people, most of them white, who were getting into vehicles similar to or more expensive than her Lexus. She watched as he circled around, seemingly searching for something before spotting her and immediately turning on his lights. Something cold settled in her stomach. This wasn't random. This wasn't even about car thefts. He had targeted her specifically. She saved the video and attached it to an email for Delia, along with her own recording and the one Thomas had taken. She hesitated only briefly before pressing send, then closed her laptop. Sleep seemed impossible, but Amara knew she needed to rest. She had surgeries scheduled for tomorrow, people counting on her steady hands and clear mind. She couldn't let Officer Miller take that from her too. As she prepared for bed, her phone rang again. It was Dr. Patel. "Amara, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I thought you should know there's a video of your encounter with that police officer making the rounds among hospital staff. Someone must have shared it." Amara sat heavily on the edge of her bed. "How bad is it? For you?" "Not bad at all. You were completely professional. For that officer? Let's just say he doesn't come off well. The administration is already getting calls." "From who?" "Everyone. Other doctors, patients' families, community leaders who recognize you from your work with the children's hospital. People are angry, Amara, and they're asking questions about how often this happens." Amara wasn't sure how to feel about this development. On one hand, she'd wanted accountability. On the other, she hadn't planned on becoming the center of a controversy. "What should I do?" she asked, suddenly feeling out of her depth. Dr. Patel's voice was gentle. "Get some sleep. Come to work tomorrow with your head held high. And know that whatever you decide to do about this, you have support." After they hung up, Amara lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications, but she ignored them. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face whatever was coming. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing she knew, her alarm was blaring. As she showered and dressed, she steeled herself for the day ahead. She had patients who needed her regardless of what else was happening. When she arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere was different. People looked at her differently. Some with sympathy, others with something like admiration. Nurses she barely knew stopped to express their support. Residents watched her with wide eyes as she made her rounds. By midday, Amara's office phone was ringing constantly. Local news outlets wanting a statement. The hospital's public relations team asking how they should respond to inquiries. And, finally, a call from the police department itself. Not Officer Miller, but his superior, Lieutenant Diana Chen, requesting a meeting. "I've reviewed the footage from last night," Lieutenant Chen said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'd like to discuss the incident with you in person, if possible." Amara glanced at her calendar, already full with patient consultations and a surgery, scheduled for that afternoon. "I'm afraid I'm completely booked today, Lieutenant." "I understand," Chen replied. "Would tomorrow morning work? This is a matter we'd like to address quickly." Amara thought of Delia's advice. "Don't let them bury it." "I'll make time," she said, "but I'd like my attorney to be present." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "Of course," Lieutenant Chen said finally. "That's your right. Shall we say 9 a.m. at your office? We can come to you." After agreeing to the meeting, Amara sat at her desk, turning her phone over in her hands. The recording she'd made, the evidence of what had happened, was no longer just hers. It was out there in the world now, being shared and discussed by people she'd never met. For better or worse, what had begun as a frightening encounter in a parking garage had become something much bigger. And tomorrow she would face the department that employed Officer Miller and demand answers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Delia. "Just got out of court. Watching your videos now. Don't say anything to anyone from the department until I get there. We're going to make this right." Amara took a deep breath and texted back a single word. "Okay." Then she put her phone away and stood up. She had patients waiting, lives to save. Whatever was coming with Officer Miller and the police department would have to wait its turn. She found comfort in the familiar routine, checking patient charts, reviewing test results, making notes for the residents who would join her later. The work kept her mind focused, preventing it from circling back to the anxiety that had made sleep nearly impossible the night before. At 8:45, she looked up from her computer to find Delia standing in her office doorway, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite the early hour, Delia looked completely alert, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm and determination written across her face. "You ready for this?" Delia asked, stepping into the office and closing the door behind her. Amara nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." Delia set her portfolio on the desk and took a seat across from Amara. "Let's go over the game plan. Lieutenant Chen is coming here to do damage control. The videos are spreading online. Local news picked it up this morning." "What?" Amara hadn't checked the news or social media since the incident. "How bad is it?" "Bad. For the department, not for you," Delia said firmly. "You were calm, professional, and clearly in the right. Officer Miller, on the other hand, comes across exactly as what he is. A cop who racially profiled a black professional woman and escalated a non-situation to a potentially dangerous one." Amara pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling a headache forming. "I never wanted to be on the news." "I know," Delia said, her voice softening slightly. "But sometimes these things choose us, not the other way around. Now listen, Chen is going to try to smooth this over. She'll apologize, say it was a misunderstanding, promise to handle it internally. Don't accept any of that. What do we want instead? Amara asked. Accountability, Delia said simply. Miller's record, a formal investigation, and a public acknowledgement from the department that what happened was wrong, not just an unfortunate mistake, but wrong. Before Amara could respond, her office phone rang. The receptionist at the front desk was calling to let her know that Lieutenant Chen had arrived, along with another officer. Send them up, Amara said, straightening her white coat and taking a deep breath. A few minutes later, there was a knock at her office door. Amara opened it to find Lieutenant Chen, a compact Asian woman with short, practical hair, and a middle-aged black man in a suit who introduced himself as Captain Howard Banks, head of internal affairs. Amara gestured for them to sit in the chairs opposite her desk, while Delia remained standing slightly behind Amara, a silent but unmistakable presence. Dr. Johnson, Lieutenant Chen began, her voice carefully neutral. First, I want to apologize for what happened yesterday evening. I've reviewed all the available footage, and it's clear that Officer Miller's conduct fell well below our department's standards. Which standards specifically? Delia asked before Amara could respond. Chen glanced at her, clearly recognizing the lawyer's tactical approach. Officer Miller failed to properly identify himself or state the reason for the stop. He escalated a routine inquiry unnecessarily, and his body camera was not activated, which is a direct violation of department policy. And the racial profiling? Delia pressed. The footage from the garage cameras clearly shows Officer Miller bypassing multiple white individuals entering vehicles similar to Dr. Johnson's, before specifically targeting her. Captain Banks leaned forward slightly. That's one of the main reasons I'm here today. The Internal Affairs Division is opening a formal investigation into Officer Miller's conduct, including examining whether racial bias played a role in his actions. Amara met his gaze steadily. You don't need to investigate whether bias was involved, Captain. It clearly was. The question is what your department plans to do about it. Officer Miller has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of our investigation, Lieutenant Chen said. I can assure you we're taking this very seriously. Administrative leave, Delia repeated, her tone making it clear how insufficient she found this response. With pay, I assume. That's standard procedure during an investigation, Captain Banks replied, not quite meeting her eyes. And what about Officer Miller's record? Amara asked. Has he done this before? The brief glance that passed between Chen and Banks told her everything she needed to know. We can't discuss an officer's personnel file, Lieutenant Chen said carefully. But I can tell you that the investigation will be thorough and will include a review of any previous complaints. Delia opened her portfolio and pulled out a printed document. We've already submitted a formal request for Officer Miller's complete record under the Freedom of Information Act. We've also requested all body camera footage and dash cam footage from his shift yesterday, as well as the previous month. Captain Banks took the document, his expression unreadable. This will be processed according to department procedures, which typically means delays and redactions, Delia countered. So let me be clear about our position. Dr. Johnson was racially profiled, harassed, and placed in fear for her safety by one of your officers. We have multiple video recordings that prove this beyond any doubt. Those videos are already in the public domain and generating significant community concern. She paused, letting her words sink in. We're not interested in confidential settlements or empty promises about internal reviews. We want transparency, accountability, and meaningful change. Lieutenant Chen straightened in her chair. What exactly are you asking for? Amara spoke up, her voice calm but firm. I want Officer Miller's complete unredacted record made public. I want to know if there have been other complaints against him and how your department handled them. I want a public statement from the FOIR Chief of Police acknowledging that what happened was not a misunderstanding, but a clear case of racial profiling. And I want a comprehensive review of your department's policies and training regarding bias. Some of what you're asking for goes beyond what we can legally provide, Captain Banks began. Then provide what you legally can, Delia interrupted, and be prepared to explain in court why you can't provide the rest. The tension in the room was palpable. Amara watched as Lieutenant Chen and Captain Banks exchanged another glance, clearly recalculating their approach. "We'll take your requests back to the chief," Lieutenant Chen said finally. "But I want you to know that regardless of any legal proceedings, I personally believe what happened was wrong, and I'm committed to addressing it appropriately." "I appreciate that," Amara said, softening her tone slightly. "But good intentions aren't enough, not anymore." As the meeting concluded and the officers prepared to leave, Amara's office phone rang again. Her assistant's voice came through, sounding slightly panicked. "Dr. Johnson, there are reporters in the lobby asking for you. Hospital security is trying to keep them out, but there are a lot of them." Amara closed her eyes briefly. "Tell them I'm with patients and can't comment right now." "Lieutenant," Chen paused at the door. "This is going to get bigger before it gets smaller, Dr. Johnson. If there's anything we can do to help manage the media situation—" "You've done enough," Delia said firmly, moving to stand beside Amara. "We'll handle it from here." After Chen and Banks left, Amara sank into her chair, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. "Now what?" "Now we prepare for the next phase," Delia said, pulling out her phone. "The department will try to control the narrative. We need to make sure your voice isn't lost in the process." "I'm not doing interviews," Amara said firmly. "I'm a doctor, not an activist. I have patients who need me." "You don't have to be on camera," Delia assured her. "But we should release a statement. Something simple that makes it clear what happened and what you want to see change." Before Amara could respond, her assistant knocked and entered, looking anxious. "Dr. Johnson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." She handed Amara her tablet open to a local news website. The headline read, "Officer accused of racial profiling has history of complaints, sources say." Amara skimmed the article, her heart racing. According to anonymous sources within the department, Officer Raymond Miller had been the subject of at least 7 formal complaints in the past 3 years, 3 of which specifically alleged racial bias. None had resulted in disciplinary action. "This changes things," Delia said quietly, reading over Amara's shoulder. "Someone inside the department is talking. This isn't just about you anymore." Amara handed the tablet back to her assistant. "Cancel my non-urgent appointments for today. Reschedule what you can. And see if Dr. Patel can cover my afternoon rounds." After her assistant left, Amara turned to Delia. "You're right. This is bigger than me now. So let's do that statement. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about punishing one officer. This is about changing a system that protected him despite multiple complaints." Delia nodded, a smile of approval spreading across her face. "Now you're thinking like an activist." For the next hour, they worked on crafting a statement that was clear, factual, and focused on systemic change rather than personal grievance. When they finished, Amara read it over one last time before giving Delia permission to release it to the press. By noon, Amara's phone was buzzing constantly with calls and messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers who had seen the videos or read about the incident. Community leaders were organizing a rally outside police headquarters. The hospital administration had issued a statement of support for her. And social media was flooded with similar stories from other professionals of color who had experienced profiling in the city. "This is how change happens," Delia told her as they watched the story unfold on Amara's office television. "One incident breaks through, and suddenly everyone who's been suffering in silence finds their voice." Amara wasn't sure how to feel. Part of her wished she could go back to being just a doctor, focused on her patients and her research. But another part recognized the importance of this moment, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in spaces they had every right to occupy. "What happens next?" she asked Delia. "Next, we keep pushing for transparency. We keep the pressure on until the department can't ignore it anymore. And we make sure that whatever changes come from this stick." Amara nodded, a new sense of resolve settling over her. What had begun as a frightening confrontation in a parking garage had become something much larger, a catalyst for the kind of change she had always hoped to see but never expected to lead. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready." I've written an engaging third part of Dr. Amara Johnson's story that develops the narrative as she meets with police officials and discovers Officer Miller's problematic history. This section shows Amara beginning to embrace a larger role in seeking accountability. I still can't believe they handed these over so quickly, Amara said, leafing through Officer Miller's personnel file. Normally, such records would take weeks or months to obtain through official channels. Delia looked up from her computer with a grim smile. They didn't have much choice. Not with the videos still circulating and 3 more people coming forward, with similar experiences. In the days since the incident, the story had snowballed. What began as a video shared among hospital staff had become front-page news. 3 other professionals, a black architect, a Latino professor, and an Indian tech executive, had come forward with their own stories of being stopped by Officer Miller under questionable circumstances. All 3 incidents had occurred in affluent areas of the city. None had resulted in arrests, but all bore the same hallmarks of racial profiling. "Look at this," Amara said, pushing a document across the desk to Delia. 7 formal complaints, in 3 years, and every single one was dismissed as unfounded or lacking sufficient evidence. Delia took the paper, her eyes scanning the text. And guess who signed off on most of these dismissals? Lieutenant Gregory Walsh. She turned her computer screen so Amara could see the article she'd been reading. The same Lieutenant Walsh who was transferred to another precinct last year after allegations of fostering a hostile work environment. Amara shook her head, trying to process it all. So Walsh protected Miller, and when Walsh finally got in trouble himself, they just moved him somewhere else instead of firing him. "That's how the system works," Delia said, leaning back in her chair. "Or rather, how it's broken. They shuffle the problem around instead of solving it." Amara's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Patel. "Channel 7 is outside the hospital again asking for interviews. Admin says to refer them to PR." She showed the message to Delia. "I can't keep doing my job with reporters following me around." "No," Delia sighed. "But right now your story is the one that broke through. People care because they can see themselves in your place. A respected professional just trying to go home after work." "What about the others? The ones who don't have medical degrees and security camera footage to back them up?" "That's exactly why this matters," Delia said, her voice softening. "Because for every case like yours that gets attention, there are dozens that don't." The office phone rang and Delia's assistant poked her head in. "Captain Banks from Internal Affairs is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Delia put the call on speaker. "This is Delia Washington. I have Dr. Johnson with me." "Thank you for taking my call," Banks said, his voice slightly tinny through the speaker. "I wanted to update you both personally before this hits the news. We've completed our preliminary investigation into Officer Miller's conduct." Amara and Delia exchanged surprised glances. Investigations like this typically took weeks, not days. "That was fast," Delia remarked, skepticism evident in her tone. "We prioritized this case given the public interest," Banks replied. "And frankly, the evidence was overwhelming. Officer Miller's body camera was indeed turned off during his entire shift, not just during his interaction with Dr. Johnson. His dashcam footage shows him bypassing multiple vehicles similar to Dr. Johnson's before, targeting her specifically. And his written report of the incident contains several statements directly contradicted by the security footage." He paused, as if gathering himself. "Based on these findings, along with a review of previous complaints and his overall record, the department has terminated Officer Miller's employment effective immediately." The room fell silent. Amara felt a complex mix of emotions, relief, vindication, but also a strange sense of hollowness. One officer losing his job wouldn't fix a broken system. What about the supervisors who dismissed all those previous complaints? Delia asked, apparently sharing Amara's thoughts. "That's part of a broader internal investigation that's still ongoing," Banks said carefully. "I can't comment on that aspect yet, but I wanted you to know that the Chief of Police will be holding a press conference at 4 p.m. today to announce Miller's termination and address some of the concerns raised by Dr. Johnson and others." After ending the call, Amara sat back, trying to process what they'd just heard. They're throwing Miller under the bus to protect the department, Delia said, voicing Amara's unspoken thought. So what do we do now? Amara asked. We watch the press conference, we see if they're serious about real change or just damage control, and we decide our next steps based on that. At 3:45, they moved to the small conference room where Delia had set up a television. Several other attorneys from the firm joined them, along with representatives from 2 local civil rights organizations who had reached out to support their efforts. The chief of police, a tall man with steel-gray hair and a carefully neutral expression, appeared precisely at 4 p.m., flanked by Captain Banks and several other officers Amara didn't recognize. Good afternoon, the chief began, his voice steady. I'm here today to address a matter that has caused significant concern in our community. 4 days ago, one of our officers, Raymond Miller, stopped and questioned Dr. Amara Johnson, a neurosurgeon at Memorial Hospital, as she was attempting to enter her own vehicle after her shift. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. After a thorough investigation, we have determined that Officer Miller's conduct during this incident violated multiple department policies, including our standards for professional conduct, our procedures for civilian interactions, and our explicit prohibition against bias-based policing. As a result, Officer Miller's employment with this department has been terminated. A murmur ran through the room. The chief's directness was unexpected. But this isn't just about one officer, he continued, surprising them further. The investigation revealed that previous complaints against Officer Miller were not properly addressed. This represents a failure of supervision and accountability that cannot be tolerated. Effective immediately, we are launching a comprehensive review of our internal complaint process led by an independent third party. He went on to announce several additional measures: mandatory retraining on bias for all officers, a revision of body camera policies with stricter consequences for non-compliance, and the formation of a civilian oversight committee to review complaints of racial profiling. Finally, the chief said, his tone becoming more personal, I want to speak directly to Dr. Johnson. On behalf of this department, I apologize for what you experienced. It was wrong, it was unjust, and it does not represent who we aspire to be as public servants. We are committed to earning back your trust and the trust of our entire community. As the press conference ended and the room filled with excited conversation, Amara sat quietly, trying to absorb what she'd just heard. It was more than she had expected. An actual acknowledgement of wrongdoing, concrete steps toward change. They're serious, she said to Delia, who nodded thoughtfully. It's a good start, Delia agreed. But the real test will be whether they follow through. Press conferences are easy. Changing institutional culture is hard. Amara's phone buzzed. Again, a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Dr. Johnson? A woman's voice, unfamiliar but somehow familiar at the same time. This is Keisha Taylor. I don't know if you remember me. Amara frowned, trying to place the name. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I was your patient last year. Brain tumor. You operated on me 2 days after Christmas. Mrs. Taylor, of course, Amara said, the memory clicking into place. How are you doing? I'm doing great, doctor. Cancer-free, but that's not why I'm calling. I saw what happened to you on the news and, well, the same thing happened to my husband 3 months ago, same officer. We tried to file a complaint, but nothing came of it. Amara's heart sank. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Taylor. Don't be sorry, Keisha said firmly. Be proud. Because of you speaking up, that officer can't do this to anyone else. My husband watched that press conference just now and broke down crying. You did that. You made that happen. After the call ended, Amara sat in silence for a long moment, thinking about Keisha's husband and all the others who hadn't had security cameras and influential friends to back them up. She thought about the power of being heard, of having your truth acknowledged. Delia, she said finally, I think I want to do the interview. Delia looked up, surprised. Which one? We've had requests from every news outlet in the city. All of them, Amara said, a new certainty in her voice. Not just about what happened to me, but about what happens next. About that civilian oversight committee the chief mentioned. I want to be on it. Delia smiled slowly. From reluctant witness to community advocate, that's quite a journey for 1 week. It wasn't by choice, Amara admitted. But I'm here now, and I can either retreat back to my comfortable life and hope someone else picks up the fight, or I can use whatever platform this has given me to push for real change. The second option is a lot harder, Delia warned. There will be backlash. People who think you're making too much of this. People who think you're not doing enough. It's exhausting work. So is brain surgery, Amara said with a small smile. But it's worth it when you can help someone heal. That evening, as Amara finally drove home, she noticed a familiar police cruiser parked near the hospital exit. For a moment, her heart raced with the memory of flashing lights and accusations. But as she drew closer, she saw it was Lieutenant Chen, waiting patiently by her vehicle. Amara pulled over and rolled down her window. "Lieutenant?" "Dr. Johnson," Chen nodded. "I heard you might be interested in joining the Civilian Oversight Committee." "News travels fast," Amara remarked. "We need people like you," Chen said simply. "People who've experienced the problem firsthand and have the courage to be part of the solution. It won't be easy. Change never is. But if you're willing, I'd like to help make it happen." Amara studied the officer's face, looking for signs of insincerity or political calculation. She found none, just the tired eyes of someone who, like her, was trying to do the right thing within a flawed system. "Send me the details," Amara said finally. "I'll be there." Amara took a deep breath, glancing down at her notes, though she hardly needed them. She'd practiced this speech dozens of times, refining it with Delia's help, determined to get the tone just right, hopeful but realistic, acknowledging progress without minimizing how much work remained. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "6 months ago, I was stopped by a police officer who accused me of stealing my own car. That incident, painful as it was, became a catalyst for change in our community. Today, I want to share what that change looks like, where we still need to go, and why this work matters to all of us, regardless of our profession, our neighborhood, or the color of our skin." The room fell silent as Amara spoke, detailing the committee's accomplishments. A completely restructured complaint process that now included civilian review, mandatory body camera compliance with real consequences for violations, a new training program on bias recognition developed in partnership with local universities, and quarterly public reports on stops, searches, and arrests, broken down by race, gender, and neighborhood. These changes didn't happen because one officer lost his job, Amara continued. They happened because our community demanded better, and because leaders within the department were willing to listen. They happened because we all recognized that safety and justice must go hand in hand, that neither is possible without the other. As she spoke, Amara couldn't help but reflect on her own journey. The month since the incident had been a whirlwind of media interviews, community meetings, and late-night strategy sessions with Delia and the growing network of advocates who had rallied around their cause. She'd cut back her surgical hours to make time for the committee work, a decision that had initially felt like a sacrifice but had gradually revealed itself as an unexpected calling. "None of this has been easy," she admitted to the audience. "Change never is. We've had heated debates in this very room. We've faced resistance from those who feared what these changes might mean. We've made mistakes and had to course correct. But through it all, we've remained committed to a simple idea: that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect by those sworn to protect and serve them." From her seat in the front row, Delia gave Amara an encouraging nod. Beside her sat Thomas, the security guard whose quick thinking had provided crucial evidence. He had become an unexpected ally in their work, joining the committee as a representative from the private security sector and bringing valuable perspective from his years of experience. "I want to take a moment to recognize some of the people who made today possible," Amara said, acknowledging Lieutenant Chen, who had become a crucial bridge between the committee and the department, Captain Banks, whose initial investigation had set the tone for accountability, and the 4 other individuals who had come forward with their own stories of being profiled by Officer Miller. "And finally," she added, I want to recognize someone who couldn't be here today. A young man named Antonio Rivera. A hush fell over the room. Antonio's case had made headlines just 2 months earlier. A college student stopped for a minor traffic violation who ended up handcuffed on the ground when an officer mistook his reaching for his ID as a threatening movement. The entire incident was caught on the officer's body camera, which under the new policies had been promptly released to the public. Thanks to our new complaint process, the officer involved was quickly placed on administrative leave. While the incident was investigated, Amara explained, the committee reviewed the footage and recommended additional training for the officer, who has since completed that training and acknowledged his mistake. More importantly, Antonio received a genuine apology and has since joined our Youth Advisory Council, helping to rebuild trust between young people and the police. She paused, letting the significance sink in. This is what accountability looks like. Not punishment for its own sake, but a process that allows for mistakes to be acknowledged, addressed, and learned from. As Amara concluded her remarks and the mayor stepped up to the podium, she felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what they'd accomplished, awareness of how much work remained, and a lingering sadness for all those who had suffered similar experiences without ever seeing justice. After the ceremony, as people mingled and chatted over coffee and pastries, Amara found herself approached by an older white officer she didn't recognize. His weathered face and the stripes on his uniform suggested decades of service. "Dr. Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Sergeant Paul Wilson. I've been with the department for 32 years. Amara shook his hand, curious about what had prompted him to seek her out. "I just wanted to say," he continued, his voice gruff but sincere, "that I was skeptical about all this at first. Thought it was just politics, you know. But I've been through the new training program and I've seen how the complaint process works now. It's better. For everyone." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "What happened to you? That shouldn't have happened. And I'm sorry it did. But some good has come from it." Before Amara could respond, Sergeant Wilson was called away by a colleague. She watched him go, struck by the unexpected interaction. Throughout this process, she had braced herself for resistance, for defensiveness, for the kind of backlash that often accompanied calls for change. There had been some of that, certainly, but there had also been officers like Chen and Wilson who recognized that accountability strengthened rather than undermined their profession. As the event wound down, Amara found herself standing with Delia by the large windows overlooking the city. 6 months, Delia mused, sipping her coffee. "Did you ever imagine we'd come this far so quickly?" Amara shook her head. "Not really. There were days I thought we were just spinning our wheels, especially after that setback with the union negotiations. But we pushed through," Delia said. "And look at what we've accomplished." "What we've started," Amara corrected gently. "Let's not pretend the work is done." Delia smiled. Once a perfectionist, always a perfectionist, even with social change. "Speaking of work," Amara said, checking her watch, "I need to get to the hospital. I have a tumor resection at 1. "Back to saving lives one brain at a time," Delia teased, while somehow also finding time to reform the police department. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Amara reflected on how her life had changed. The incident with Officer Miller could have left her bitter, fearful, or determined to retreat into the safety of her professional achievements. Instead, it had expanded her sense of purpose and connected her to a community of people working for change across the city. In the hospital parking garage, the same one where it had all begun, Amara paused before getting into her car, taking in the familiar surroundings with new eyes. The security cameras that had captured her confrontation with Miller had been upgraded, part of a hospital-wide safety initiative she had helped implement. A new sign at the garage entrance clearly stated the rights and responsibilities of security personnel, with a QR code linking to the hospital's complaint process. Small changes perhaps, but meaningful ones, the kind that might prevent someone else from experiencing what she had gone through. As she drove to the main hospital entrance, Amara noticed a police cruiser parked nearby, an officer inside filling out paperwork. For a brief moment, the old anxiety fluttered in her chest, a conditioned response to the sight of those lights in that uniform. But it passed quickly, replaced by a more complex understanding. That officer was just a person doing a job that came with tremendous power and responsibility, which was precisely why accountability mattered so much. Inside the hospital, life continued as it always had. Patients needed care. Residents needed guidance. The rhythms of healing and hope that had drawn Amara to medicine in the first place remained unchanged. But she had changed, in ways both subtle and profound. "Dr. Johnson," a nurse called as Amara stepped off the elevator. "Your patient is prepped and ready. Family's asking for you." Amara nodded, slipping back into the role she had spent a lifetime perfecting. In the surgical suite, she would be fully present, focused entirely on the life in her hands. But afterward, she would attend a committee meeting, review a draft of the next quarterly report, and continue the work of building a more just community. One incident in a parking garage had ended an officer's career, but it had also launched something new. A doctor who had discovered that healing could take many forms, and that some of the most important work happened outside the operating room. As she scrubbed in for surgery, Amara thought about Antonio Rivera and Keisha Taylor's husband, and all the others whose stories had emerged in the wake of her own. She thought about Lieutenant Chen and Sergeant Wilson, and the possibilities for change from within a flawed system. And she thought about the long road still ahead, the setbacks and victories yet to come. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was. But as Amara had learned over the past 6 months, it was possible. And that possibility made all the difference. I've written an engaging final part to Dr. Amara Johnson's story that shows the meaningful changes resulting from her experience and advocacy. This conclusion balances personal growth with systemic progress while acknowledging the ongoing nature of social change.